Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm talking about what Konami needs to do for their next ban list. So it actually hasn't been too long since we've gotten our last ban list, and the format doesn't feel too stale at all, despite some complaints saying that it doesn't feel like it changed actually that much. But with the release of Maze of Muertos, we really saw some new and interesting versions of decks, but a lot of these decks could be considered slop piles, especially the yummy decks. And yeah, there's a lot of things that are still hanging around that I think just need to get the axe at this point. So as always, we're going to start this video off with talking about a few floodgates, and I'm going to kind of do these in chunks of 3 solely because it's basically 3 of the same card. So starting off with the banished floodgates, Shifter, Dimensional Fissure, and Different Dimension Ground. I think all 3 of these cards need to go. It's just unfun gameplay when you tell your opponent that they just can't play the game because they don't have access to a core mechanic of the game, being the graveyard. You know, Dimensional Fissure is a bit more interactable than Shifter or Ground, but it's still upsetting because you can't even use something like Fallen in the Virtuous, which is in a lot of decks, because you can't even activate it in the first place. Now, I do want to say that I think these cards are like fine in rogue decks and stuff, but they're not in rogue decks. They're in meta decks. They're in Mitsurugi. They're in Vanquish Soul K9. You have a really good shot of seeing this card at your locals, at a regional, at a YCS. Like, it's not just like that one random deck floating around that has Shifter in it. I mean, like, we can't just forget about how crazy Malice got when it was the deck in the meta, and just putting the card to 1 doesn't really do anything, and there's not really any rogue decks that it helps anymore. On to the next group of 3 cards. We're talking about Deck Lockdown, Droll and Lockbird, and Mistaken Arrest. Droll and Lockbird, in my opinion, being the most egregious version of these cards. However, we do have to look at the OCG for representation for certain ban lists, so I do think that Droll will probably go to 1 and just stay there for a very long time. As much as I wish it was banned, I do think Deck Lockdown and Mistaken Arrest deserve to be banned 100%. If you've watched my channel, you know that I am really against floodgates. I'm really against things that stop your opponent from playing, even if I'm using them. And by the way, I will use them. I will play Droll and Lockbird in my decks, and I currently do. And I encourage you to do the same because the card is available, but I really don't like it. Now, I've pled my case for Droll before, but I haven't really talked about Deck Lockdown or Mistaken Arrest. These are cards that people will side in going first, do their full combo, and then set or activate either, one of the two. And then during your turn, you just can't do the things that you need to do. And that's where I have a serious problem. Like, I will go on the record and be a little bit controversial here and say that I would prefer my opponent to have a Baron or a Borreload Savage Dragon, or just an Omni Negate on their board, or 2 or even 3 Omni Negates on their board, than not be able to search my deck, not be able to special summon from my deck. Like, I should be allowed to attempt to play the game. Now we'll be moving on to some single cards here, and oh my gosh, does K9 need to be hit? They need to hit it properly. Can we please just get rid of K9 Ripper? This card is fundamentally flawed, being that it's a generic. So no matter what, like, Konami just can no longer print level 5 archetypes and expect them not to turn into K9 piles. Not to mention, this card also just negates a very good chunk of hand traps. So it's like, oh, I have my combo and now I get to play ignoring whatever hand trap I want to ignore. And it's super, super obnoxious. And it doesn't just stop at hand traps. Like, they also just get to stop something in your opponent's graveyard or hand. So you're talking Draco Tail. Now, by the way, I do think Draco Tail is a bit powerful right now, though I don't think it's necessarily because of the Draco Tail cards. But, like, stopping a Femena. Now, we can talk about Magnet Warriors. Stopping a Sigma Minus. That just can shut down things. This card both stops Sigma Minus and Sigma Plus in Magnet Warriors, and that's a problem. Yummy is still around, and honestly, I don't really care too much for the Yummy cards, but I do care that they just get splashed into, like, everything. And I think they're the main culprit of the slop piles that we see now. And I really think that, yeah, Cupsy Yummy needs to go. Not the main deck, but the extra deck. Cupsy Yummy Way. The way I feel about this card is basically the way that I feel about Ryzeal Duo Drive. Like, I don't really care if Detonator is at 1, if Duo Drive is at 0. And that's kind of how I feel with Yummy Snatchy and Cupsy Yummy Way. Like, Snatchy going to 1, it's fine. It hits the deck a little bit. Cupsy Yummy Way going to 0, that's a pretty good hit, and it allows Yummy to still be Yummy. Though I do think in its current state, banning Cupsy Yummy Way will kill Yummy. Now, there's a very specific reason that I think Cupsy Yummy Way needs to go, and it is solely because of all of the level 1s plus link 1s getting you into full Yummy combo. It's how like I said, how I feel about Ryzeal, though Ryzeal does actually lock you into rank 4s once you start playing into it, something that Yummy does not do. It is extremely, extremely unrestrictive as an archetype, and that's why I think Yummy is just flawed in general because of that. Speaking of Ryzeal, and something that probably shouldn't have survived Ryzeal format, but it did, and now it's a problem in Luna Light mainly, but you also see some other rank 4 decks using it, and it's time to just address the drunk elephant in the room. Beagusa, the Terribly Tired Tapir. This card just needs to go. I'm going to keep it pretty short on this one. I don't like this card, and I think it needs to go, and I think a lot of people would agree with me. Now, I do actually have a pretty funny story to add on for Beagusa because, well, this is actually back when I was playing Tempai, which is one of the most hated decks of all time. My opponent would make Beagusa after I activated Perulia and Shifter, and then I would just top deck Change of Heart, and I took control of it. And that happened 2 times in a row to the same opponent during a regional. I am so sorry if that was you, but know that I do find it as a fairly humorous story to tell about how stupid Beagusa is and how stupid some other cards are. It's time to fix Fiendsmith. Wave High King Caesar just needs to go, and this is to prevent the slop decks from forming just because they can. Caesar is just unfortunately too generic currently. Now, I'd love to see a retrain of Caesar that requires DD monsters rather than just 2 fiends because it's just too generic. I mean, any deck right now can play a single engraver, nothing else, Fiendsmith, as long as they have a Requiem, a Necroquip, and a Caesar plus any Light Fiend extra deck monster. They can go in, just turbo into a Caesar. And I think that is just a massive problem in deck design. It's a massive problem for people who like to deck build. It's just a problem in general. And Caesar has been the whole point of playing Fiendsmith for a lot of people, to the point where you would make Caesar before you would make the Fiendsmith fusions in certain scenarios. Now, I do want to point out that another easy way to do this would to be ban Fiendsmith Requiem, which, yeah, ban that card. It's fundamentally flawed. However, we're getting new Unchained support. Caesar is just going to be a part of that again. It just needs to go. And to be honest, Requiem can kind of hang around then, because Fiendsmith just becomes a cool side engine rather than Caesar Turbo. And that's kind of like that's really where I've come up with Caesar as being banned instead of Requiem. Though I do understand not banning Caesar because DDD players are really, really dedicated. So I get it. Alright, and one last ban that I want to talk about is more of a wish list type of deal rather than I think Konami will. But it's a card that I have hated since I first even got mine. And that card is Nibiru, the Primal Being. I don't think Nibiru gets enough hate for what it does to the game. I understand that it was designed to try and slow down the game, but right now it just makes people have to build awkwardly and play awkwardly to play around your opponent possibly having this card. I think a good example of this would be the popularity of Fiendsmith would be much less if Nibiru just didn't exist, because a lot of these people are making Caesar solely to play around Nibiru. There's decks that would make Gossip Shadow solely to play around Nibiru. There's decks that would throw it on an Omni Negate, and it's always Omni Negate by Summon 5, Omni Negate on Summon 4. all referencing Nibiru. Now, not every deck loses to Nibiru, so I do think it's a bit on the more fair side. But when it hits, it can really, really hit. And you can just let your opponent build up for the longest time and then just hit them with the rock. And sometimes it just ends their turn, and then they don't have anything beyond that. And you get to play for free and kill them. I think that's a flaw in the design of Nibiru. I think it needs to be hated a bit more. It's just there's other things that need to go first. And I'm just saying that I think it needs to go now. Especially with it being searchable in certain decks, like Mitsurugi, and getting benefit from the Mitsurugi cards, by the way, but I don't think Mitsurugi needs to get hit necessarily. I do think Nibiru needs to go. Alright, and one just last little thing is 2 semi-limits. Now, I think Ash Blossom is going to go to 2. I don't think it needs to. The OCG did that. We're probably going to get it. A lot of people are calling for it. I still don't think it needs to happen, but Ash Blossom will probably go to 2. Something I do need, or think that needs to happen, is Fallen of Albaz to 2. Now, you might think this is crazy, but just remember that Fallen of the White Dragon is always treated as Fallen of Albaz, which means it's treated as Fallen of Albaz during deck building, and you could only play 1 of each of these cards in your deck, or 2 of either. Now, that's pretty much my whole reasoning behind this. I think Fallen of the White Dragon is just an upsetting card in general. I think it's a huge reason that Draco Tail is one of the top decks right now, and it's just the Fallen of Albaz cards are what makes Draco Tail as good as it is, and I think this is an alright hit. It doesn't really hit branded, it doesn't really hit Draco Tail too much, though I do think there's other things that we can do to Draco Tail, but I think the floodgates are much more of a problem, because without those floodgates we start to see other decks shine, and Draco Tail is a fairly fair deck. So there's plenty of other things that I would put on a ban list. Like, I think Archlord Christia needs to go, I think Spell Canceller needs to go, but just these are more of like a wish list for me more immediately than the others. There's a lot of things that could get limited. Like Dominus Impulse is a really upsetting card, but we also want to see what's coming in the future, and maybe the existence of that card limits the design and slows down some of the power creep, which might be a little bit nice in Yu-Gi-Oh! Though new decks coming out and power creeping those decks to entice players is kind of just what Konami does. It's what most card games do, to be honest, if you look at any card game. But yeah, if you liked this video, or you disagreed with me, or you agreed with me, let me know in the comments. Drop a like and subscribe if you want to see me again. Also, I have my Discord in the comments, so do join there where we can chat, and then I will see you next time. Thank you so much.